Hi everyone, my name is Rose, also known as TA Summers. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I did the intro this time. I somehow decided to miss it when I was doing my most disappointing reads of 2025, but I did the intro this time. So score 1 for this particular video. And this is going to be the second part of my superlatives compilation for 2025. It is 2026 now, so I'm doing kind of like a retrospective of superlatives of all the things that I read in 2025. And this particular video, I'm going to try to make this as short as possible just to pull the band-aid off, because this is going to be my worst reads of 2025. I don't have too many of them. I have a choice of 5 books, and most of them I've already chopped on the channel before. And I really don't want to spend too much time on them, because several of these really rubbed me the wrong way in terms of things. And I know this is going to be a controversial video. Usually the worst books compilations are, but I know this is going to be controversial because of a couple of things I'm going to say, including why I will not be recommending one of the series that is mentioned in this respective video on my channel for future recommendations, because of several different reasons we'll talk about when we get there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Basically listing all of these books in order from least worst to most worst. So like we're going from essentially like the book that like was on my worst list but is kind of like the lesser of all of the worst, to the one where I was like, yeah, this is the worst thing that I read this year. But this first one I've talked on the channel before, and I had an extensive review on it, both in video form as well as written. I'll link it in the cards above and in the description down below if you're interested. But the first one I want to talk about is Skin by Ibi Zoboi. This was a verse novel. This was also Ibi Zoboi's first YA fantasy verse novel in terms of things. And I've talked about this already extensively on the channel, about the problems with this one, the toxic colorism, the misrepresentation of lore and Caribbean culture. So many different things went wrong in this respective book in terms of things, and it was not fun to read. It had some interesting ideas in terms of telling the stories of the two girls that are on the cover, Marisol and Genevieve. And I think certain ideas that it did have would have been better executed in a prose novel. I think also, like, one of the few positives that I have to say about Skin was that it did give an eye to chronic skin conditions. And I think that's one of the elements of the book where I think people would get something out of it, but everything else was a mess. And I don't stand behind the toxic colorism that was in this book. And it also was comped to Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And this is one of the books where it made me say, I'm going to put a moratorium on reading any YA books that are comped to Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, because of how it mishandles the themes and intention behind Toni Morrison's work. It does not do it justice, and a lot of teens really can't see like the parallels in terms of things and why this doesn't work, because The Bluest Eye is one of the most frequently challenged books and banned books in terms of things. I remember reading Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. It was later in life, but like, I remember seeing it as part of my AP curriculum, as I mentioned in one of my videos before. But Skin by Ibi Zoboi just did not work for what it intended to do, if you can say that. Like, its intention really just like didn't involve being all over the place in terms of haphazardly handling some of its themes and everything else. I wish it had been a better experience. I didn't have a lot of expectations going in, but when I saw the execution of it, I'm like, this could have been so much better. And what it chose to do just didn't sit well with me at all. But You can read my full review and see my video review. I went into quite a bit of the issues with it in that video, but Skin by Ibi Zoboi is one of the worst reads that I had in 2025. Next book on this list was a book that barely made it on my worst reads of 2025. I initially thought about including this on my most disappointing reads of 2025, but I'm like, the more that I kept sitting with it, the more I realized I'm like, okay, like this was not a pleasant reading experience, and I know this author has done better work in terms of things. I've talked about her work on the channel before. I still need to do full reviews of some of her former works, but this just really dropped the ball for a dark academia book, and I was so disappointed by it. Of course, the book that I'm talking about is An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. Oh my gosh, there were so many things that were wrong with this book in terms of things. It's about a woman who is married to an academic professor, and she's starts off at this party, ends up seeing her husband cheating with another woman, and essentially ends up leaving the house and like the party and everything else, and ending up at this in this surreal recruitment to be a part of a magical university, essentially like working within this kind of like secret society with other people. And to put a point in it, like in terms of, she's a Black woman, and like that's relevant in terms of things, because it feels like this narrative kind of conveniently forgets that this is centering some of the Black characters that are in this book. It's not great representation in terms of things. I know there have been YouTubers on, especially even some YouTubers that I respect, that says that it handles its Black cast very well. It does not. It really does not in terms of things. Literally, some of the places where some of the mentions of identity come up are in line with things that end up being contentious and like put the characters in a state of peril and like contention for what happens in the book. I'm not going to go into too deep into it. I'd rather leave that for my full video review. I did talk about it in my written review, which I will link in the description down below, because I have not talked about An Academy for Liars on my channel before this point. But I read it and I was like, I'm so disappointed with everything that this book tried to do in terms of things. I went into it thinking it was probably going to be vibes only for the dark academia pieces in terms of things. And I know, like, you know, based on Alexis Henderson's previous experiences with writing, she can write a lot better than this. So it didn't make sense to me that some of the choices were made for this respective book and were executed in the way that they were executed. And even like the attempted romance or illustration of romance that is between the main character and one of her professors is very toxic, not romantic at all in terms of things. I struggled to see why people like this one. Overall, I think some of the dark imagery had potential. That's one of the reasons why it's on the least worst part of this list, because I think there were pieces of it that were interesting in idea, but were never thoroughly fleshed out to be able to be more interesting and more intriguing, and felt like it was presented in a vague way that should have had more time to be developed and vetted through the narrative. But man, what a disappointment. Yeah, but my second worst read of 2025 is An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. Very disappointing. I wish it could have been better. Third book on this list is an author who was on my worst list for 2024 as well in terms of things. I think I've determined that Freida McFadden is a hit or miss author in for the execution of her respective stories. She writes so many of them, so it's bound to be like some of them tend to stick the landing and others of them don't. Most of the time, in terms of my experience with reading her work, she has been more misses than hits. Like even like I'm reading the Tenant right now. Like if I had managed to finish reading the Tenant before before the end of the year in 2025, that would have made this list as well. But I'm still reading it now. It's probably going to make my worst list for 2026, unfortunately. But the book that I want to highlight is actually a holiday story. It was one of my last reads of 2025, and it's The Gift by Freida McFadden. I had a very short read. I almost don't even really want to talk too much about it because it's such a quick read to be able to go through, but the protagonist in this book, who is a waitress at a diner who comes across this mysterious old lady who has a lot of trinkets, and she's trying to find a gift for her husband, since it's Christmas Eve going into Christmas Day. And the decisions that she makes and what ends up happening in terms of things just felt like a lackluster story. I did not enjoy it. I had some guesses in terms of where it would go, and I ended up being on the money for most of it in terms of what it chose to do. But I was like, this did not feel satisfying at all. For the very short experience that it was. And so I put it on my worst reads of 2025, The Gift by Freida McFadden. At least it was brief, but it was not satisfying to read, at least for me. I think this is the mission that is going to get the most controversy out of all the choices on this list in this video. And if you have seen my videos, if you've seen my reviews, you already know what I'm going to say in terms of things. This came very, very close to being my worst read of 2025, but it was beat out by one other book. Just one other book in terms of things. Like, I struggle to still even to understand why people like this book at all in terms of things, considering it sidelines its main black character who we've been following up to this point through the other two books that it was established. The myriad of perspectives that were not needed made this book entirely too long, needed editing down. I don't even understand why certain changes were made. The twist in this felt cheap, and when you are talking about very heavy subject matter such as child trafficking and human experimentation, you cannot afford to cut corners or issue very cheaply done twist for the sake of a story in terms of things. It does not work. People will be able to see that and judge you for that. And of course, this book had no trigger warnings to be able to do it. And in the culture of where we are now in terms of things that are happening in current events, the very glib presentation of child trafficking in this book in terms of things just hit me the wrong way. I got emotional about it when I was doing the review for this in terms of things, and it was hard for me to really I had to step away several times to just get myself together. I did not like how any of that was done, and I really feel like there were so many different paths that this respective series would take it, and up to this point, to give its protagonist Bree Matthews room to grow, but it felt like she was stagnant through the whole book with wall-to-wall abuse. It went from abuse starting out to a point where Bree was missing for 4 months with nobody knowing where she was, to we get to the end of the book and essentially Bree is being controlled by one of her demon love interests. And to me, this was not a fun experience. I cannot in good conscience recommend this series further on my channel in terms of things, so you will not hear me recommending this series at all. Of course, I'm talking about Oathbound by Tracy Deonn and the Legend Born series. I said I was done. I am very much completely done with this respective series, and I feel like there was so much more potential from where this series started that it did not have to end up to this. And I don't feel like it's positive representation. I don't think the mental health representation for this series is good. It kept beating us over the head about how important Bree was in terms of things that, like, the level of narrative intrusions of this was very easy to tell, and the undermining of us, the playing up of certain characters versus the undermining of other characters, including Mariah, who I mentioned in my review. Like, it was very easy to tell that Maya was undermined, like, during this, including segments where even Valak was speaking. Because I was like, no, I don't like the way that this book is being done and the narrative intrusions. And I think it was a very sobering experience for me, even last year, talking to two teens about this in very brief conversations in terms of why they chose to stop the book. I talked to one teen who stopped at Blood Mart, and I think essentially her reason was like, bouncing, like it was too long, so she was not going to pick up the book. But the other teen that I talked to who read up to Oathbound said that they had very valid reasons in terms of not continuing the series, in terms of things, and some of them aligned with mine. Some of them were very different that I didn't even think about when I was reading the book series. So it's enlightening to be able to see how people receive this series, and be able to critique it and be able to unpack it and see the ways that it's not working for what it intends to do, if that intention is clear at all. At this point, I don't think it knows what it wants to do. And I think it was very clear from the third book in the Legend Born Cycle series that it has really lost a lot of its way in terms of where it began. So I'm going to say Oathbound by Tracy Deonn is one of the worst reads of 2025 for me, and this is the end of my journey for this series, and I will not be recommending the Legend Born series on my channel for future videos and things like that. For that reason, I can't recommend a book series that I can't stand behind in terms of what it chooses to do and the representations that it has, and seeing that as being toxic and triggering. And this book still has no trigger warnings. I like, it's been almost a year since it's been released and it still has no trigger warnings on the website. I thought that by this point we would be able to see all that. I at least tried very, very hard to see all the triggering things that were on here in the book, and place them in my video for people to reference by. But yeah, I don't understand. I really don't understand. But yeah, Oathbound by Tracy Deonn was one of the worst books that I read in 2025. And the last book on this list, I told you I was going to try to be as quick as I possibly could through this video, just to peel the band-aid off for a lot of these reads, because I'd rather be talking about some of the books that I adored in 2025, among other things. But I saw problems with this respective book before it was even released, but I made a good faith decision. I was like, okay, like, I don't know the context of what this book is choosing to do. I'm going to pick it up for myself and see, you know, like how it approaches being being inspired by Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye in terms of things. And, whoo boy, I mentioned it in my video review, linked in the cards above in the description down below if you're interested, that this book put me in depression for several days, not for great reasons. Because at least I could say, like, when I read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, like, I felt the weight of that narrative for what it intended to do. And it was in a way of being able to showcase some very serious conversations, some very serious themes, and treating its audience and the characters that it was portraying with decency and respect. That the torment of these characters was not the point. It was more of being able to showcase and illuminate like the harms that this cause is to the young girls that are part of this story. But for Flip by Ngozi Ukazu, man, the anti-blackness in this book really rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm like, no one seems to want to ask Ngozi Ukazu the reason why she tried to have a white boy off himself in a black girl's body. Given the lore that is given in this respective book before that point, and also knowing that Chi-Chi's self-identity hate and obsession with Flip's body is an issue throughout this book, I'm like, what I asked myself what the author was thinking on this, and it was clear from her interview and context given, like with respect to the book and the fact that this book has no trigger warnings, that she was not thinking about this being a book for teens, and casually like just linking and having all of these different symbolisms referring to the bluest eye that completely misrepresent the themes of the book in terms of things. And I was like, no, I cannot stand behind this. This was a terrible experience. I gave this, if it were up to me, I would give it 0 stars. I gave it formerly 1 star on Goodreads, but 0 stars for me. This was not worth picking up. I did not like it. I would not recommend it. I would not give it to a kid or teen. A kid or teen can read this if they choose to, but there's going to have to be conversations in terms of things to not internalize some of the toxic things that these characters do in terms of violations of bodily autonomy, making specific choices, having these self-identity and self-esteem and internalized hate that is really just not checked or even addressed through the narrative in a responsible way. And it could have been so much better than this. It did not even have to go into some of the directions that it chose to go into it. And that upset me. Greatly upset me, to say the least, in terms of things. I had to refilm several different sections of my Flip review because I got so heated in terms of like talking about some of the things that this book chose to do. And I was just like, I'm like, it was definitely a lot of work, and it took me a couple of months to get that review and compiled together. But in the end, I hope that I explained a lot of the issues in that book and why I would not recommend it in terms of things for teens. It is not a healthy portrayal of self-esteem issues, mental health, or so many different topics in terms of talking about Black identity and self-love in terms of things. It's not a good book. It was not a good book. But yeah, my last choice for the worst read of 2025 is Ngozi Ukazu's Flip. And I'm going to leave it there because I've talked about it enough. But that is my worst reads list of 2025. I'm going to go into my next video talking about the best reads and honorary mentions that I had in terms of what I read in 2025, the total of 65 books. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to be informed of when I post new videos. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next video.